So, today is January 19th, 2023, and tomorrow, January 20th, is my 27th birthday. I've been on this wretched planet for 27 whole years. Can you believe it? It is yet another rainy day, a rainy night rather. It's been raining a lot in Chicago lately, so I thought I'd give it another go at 12:30 a.m. at night. I like to record the majority of my videos at night when it's a lot quieter, and even though it's nice and quiet, there's still, trains going by, cars driving by, the occasional police or ambulance siren. But it's got a nice amount of rain here today, and along with my black licorice tea, I also thought I would enjoy a little bit of weed on this fine night. I have myself a little glass bowl. It's a Rick and Morty bowl. My stepsister got me this as a gift years ago. It was kind of random, but she saw it in the shop and mailed it to me. I guess thought that it reminded me of her, or reminded her of me. I don't know if I should take that as a compliment, considering that we hadn't spoken in years, and then decide to mail me something, but hey, I'll take it. So maybe we'll have a little weed and a little chit chat with the rain here. I've been smoking weed for about 9 years now, pretty much since I moved to Chicago. It was kind of a once a month thing. It was a huge thing for me at first. It was a little too eye-opening at the time, after living 18 years without ever really experiencing inebriation in any way. I didn't smoke very much when I started, but by the time I was 20, I was smoking almost every day. Every night, rather. It became a real nasty habit once I initially got into the routine of it. But then I kind of stepped back from it for a little while and was able to kind of control my habits through these regular cleanses, where I'd go periods of time without smoking anything, just to kind of readjust to reality a bit. So I just recently had another one of those cleanses and have begun to start smoking weed some more lately. Weed initially, after smoking it keeps me awake. It doesn't really help me sleep, but it helps me fall asleep faster in the long run. If I smoke around like 10, I'll be able to knock out pretty hard around 1 a.m. And it's gotten to a point where it's so commonplace where it's more difficult to sleep when I haven't smoked that day. But recently on Thanksgiving, I tried acid for the first time. And LSD was something that I was always somewhat afraid to try. But always had something of interest. It seems like the type of drug that would be worth trying in my lifetime. And I'm not much of a psychonaut. I don't really do much of that. But I have done shrooms a handful of times. And acid was nothing like shrooms at all. It was actually a pretty traumatic experience. And I will probably never ever try acid again. The initial trip wasn't really that bad. I kind of eased into it, and but by the time I was trying to go to sleep, it was kind of a waking nightmare. But the worst part about it, which is the reason that I'll probably never do it again, was just the aftermath following the trip. Those 5 days after doing acid was probably like the worst depression I'd ever felt in my life. This bin or little tin here, it says Dylan's Candy Bar. This is where I keep my my weed stuff. I've had this for probably 7 years. I started working at Dylan's Candy Bar in 2015. I worked there for 3 years. You can kind of see it's got my lighters and my grinders, some papers, and it's got the current baggie. This is Bear Dance. It's a sativa that's meant to really get you up and going, keep your mind busy. It's great for working on music, working on stuff, but also just for cleaning the house, just being proactive. It does make you a little tense and paranoid, though. I used to never buy dispensary weed. I always had it, readily available, just through friends and neighbors and people in close proximity, where it was universally more convenient and cheaper, but not as consistent. But eventually, with like years after it became legal here in Chicago, I thought I'd get some just because I was in the mood for something of quality. And now that I've had just quality weed, weed that's not grown in someone's basement, you know where it comes from, get all the facts from it. I've become very attached to it. I feel like it's safer and feels healthier, even though there's nothing particularly healthy about smoking weed. But since I started smoking weed after the acid trip, where I went like a good 2 weeks maybe without smoking weed. I didn't really smoke over the holiday break following. That time, I think, gave me a good balance of being able to readjust to reality post-acid trip. So now I'm kind of getting back into the habit of smoking almost every night. I used to smoke a lot of weed and drink a lot of black coffee together at night. Never in the morning, just always at night. working on music, mixing, writing, and it became a frequent habit. My jobs that I've had in the past few years have provided me with days where I've been able to stay up and not worry about doing anything in the morning. Just a lot of evening work, a lot of days off. So like to take advantage of the mindset that you can be thrown into after staying up all night. Kind of forcing yourself to stay awake and think outside the box. It's a very unhealthy habit, but I'm able to kind of come in and out of it. I did it a lot in college. Not even to make music, just to, be in college. A lot of late nights just working on papers and assignments. I think the first time I may have actually hallucinated, not on hallucinogens, was during finals week, where I was going so many consecutive days without getting adequate sleep and staying up way late the night before an exam, and then getting up early and sitting in a diner continuing to study for the same exam in the morning, and just sitting in the booth looking at these murals that were drawn on the walls of the diner. And things were moving and things were talking, and it wasn't normal, and it was a breaking point there in college where I realized that your work may not be worth it sometimes. Thankfully, I've never had a experience like that with all the coffee and weed consumed during my late night mix sessions. I always mix alone. I feel like it's the best way for me to keep my ears in mixing mode. Sounds like there's a crow out there that doesn't want to get caught in the rain. I'm coming from a show at a venue in Chicago called Sleeping Village. I got home about an hour ago, and I couldn't find a good parking spot, so I had to park somewhere far away, and I wasn't prepared for the rain tonight, so I ended up just walking several blocks through the rain, thinking that this would be unfortunate, but the rain's very gentle and spread out, and sounds like it would be good for a little bit more a.s.m.r. here with some rain sounds. So it was the first thing I did when I got home, just dried off, changed clothes, and set everything up, set the mic up, set up my phone and my computer here, and polishing off the evening with a little bit of weed and a little bit of tea. The show I was at was for a friend of mine who has a band called Football Head, a guy named Ryan Nolan, and they were opening for another band called Daisy. The Sleeping Village, the venue that he played at, I've played at a handful of times. The first time that I played with my band Snow Ellet was at the Sleeping Village. It has a capacity of about 300 people. And they have a green room there that's not very, there's nobody guarding it, nobody standing in front of it, so really anybody can just walk into the green room and sit by the stage, which is what I do often when I go there, because I see a lot of shows there. I go and I hang up my coat there as if I own the place. We played at Sleeping Village on the last day of Origami Button's first tour, and it was by far the best show of the tour. Ryan Nolan actually used to be briefly the original bass player at Sleeping Village, or in Snow Ellet when we played at Sleeping Village. So he's actually played there a bunch of times with his band. I think that every time I've seen him was at Sleeping Village. And Sleeping Village, I'll probably end up going to a show on Thursday as well to see a band called Dearly Somber. I saw Dearly Somber for the first time at a DIY venue in 2018, I believe. Maybe 2019. Anyway, I was very moved. I thought they were the best band that night, and I've been following them ever since, but they've yet to put out any music in this time. But I've met the lead singer a couple times. Hope to meet him again on Thursday. I like to take little hits at a time. I don't like to cough my lungs out. I've played some of Dearly Somber's songs in my ballet classes before, because they're very melodic and simple. The Sleeping Village is actually about a 5-minute drive from one of the venues or studios that I work at, including the studio I was at today. It's a nice, convenient drive over for some live music, and they always play around the time I'm finishing up too, which is very nice. I recently started watching the TV show Succession on HBO. I have a friend who really likes the show and was gracious enough to let me borrow his HBO Max login info, since I don't have it anymore because I'm broke. But I watched all of season 1 in about 3 days, and it was quite a wild ride. It's a show that made Rolling Stone's recent greatest TV shows of all time list at number 11, I believe, which is very high for a TV show that's only been around for 3 seasons. Before I watched Succession. I watched the entirety of the show Mad Men, which is 7 seasons. And that was a very good show as well. It also made Rolling Stone's top TV shows list at number 7, I believe. And it's a good segue from Mad Men into Succession. They're very similar shows in a way. They both follow a lot of rich white people living in New York and dealing with business and selling shares and all that. I feel like television has become very commonplace and associated with meals for me. Every time I have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, it is also my TV time. So I can kind of knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm not typically a TV show binger, but there's a couple shows that have gotten me into that bad habit. Shows where I'll basically drop everything I'm doing just to watch. Game of Thrones was one of those shows. The Sopranos was one of those shows. The Blacklist I was really into, and that was about 8 seasons. Some of my favorite TV shows in particular, in terms of sitcoms, have always been Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. I really like the writing of Larry David, even though it's a bit outdated, but the humor lands with me a lot, and it's a good show that has the right amount of annoying, where the characters themselves aren't annoying to the audience, but they're annoying to everybody in the show. The film and TV industry was something that interested me a lot when I initially moved to Chicago, or when I initially started college, I would say. And through the years growing as a musician, I feel like that's not the path I would like to take, unless it's on a very independent, individually done scale. Something very non-corporate, not developed to make money, developed to be an art form. So I've always had the idea of applying music to visual media, but I always like to do it on my terms, and kind of gave up on the idea of making music for other people and rather have other people make visuals for my music. But that's a trade that definitely costs a lot of money these days. Most people who work in film don't typically work for free. When I was in college, I did a lot of music for student films, and a little bit after college I did some music for former student films, but not much after that. This whole setup that I have here currently by the window is near the entryway to my house, and during the holiday break, there was a pipe burst in my house, which conveniently happened while I was out of town. And there's a bunch of damage over here to the left of me that recently got covered up as a result of those pipes being busted and the handyman having to essentially tear down the walls to change the pipes. It was a very anxiety-inducing moment recently as I was on the phone in Montana with my neighbor in Chicago, trying to guide her through handling this situation. I was very fortunate to have left a spare key outside my house, because the fire department ended up getting called here, and thankfully the house didn't burn down, but the washer and dryer downstairs were sparking from water dripping from the upstairs into the downstairs outlets that they were connected to. And that's always a bad sign, but I have a lot of expensive electronics around me here, including my computer and hard drives. So if that stuff was to get wet or destroyed, that would have been extra unfortunate, but it's better than your house burning down. It was a pretty rough holiday break. On top of the post-acid depression, I also had the flu, and coming back I had car troubles and still do, and have to get my car fixed one of these days. I have high hopes for this next month. I feel this upcoming tour, which starts tomorrow with Snow Willet, will I have high hopes that it'll have good turnouts and I'll play well at all of them. And then after the snow tour, I'll be back here for 3 more weeks, and then I leave again for the Origami Button tour, which I'll be gone for the rest of February. The tour is co-headlined with another band from St. Louis called Lobby Boxer. And the first show that we ever played with our current lineup was in the basement of another band who was a friend of ours, and the band that played after us was Lobby Boxer. So that's the first time that we met, and we've subsequently played with them maybe 5 other times, every time they're in Chicago, basically. So now Origami Button and Lobby Boxer have organized this tour together, so we'll be playing in St. Louis the first day, and then of course coming right back up to Chicago the second day of the tour, which makes sense for Lobby Boxer, but I feel the tour could also end closer to St. Louis as well. But we also are playing in Detroit, Columbus, Nashville, Atlanta, several cities in Texas, including Houston, Austin, and Dallas. We're playing in Kansas City. We're playing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it's going to be a wild ride. The last tour, Origami Button, was on this summer. On day 1, our brand new tour van, not like band van, not like a tour bus, but it's a van we were very excited to use for the first time. Broke down on the first day. Broke down in Indiana, which thankfully is where our guitarist lives. So it really wasn't nearly as much of an inconvenience as it could have been with the van breaking down on us in New York City, which would have been the worst case scenario. But that was a good tour, and the van is up and running once again, so we'll be hitting the road in style here. And Snow Ellet's first tour was with a pop-punk band from Chicago called Knuckle Puck. And we were the opener of a 4-band bill, so we got to play first and then relax the rest of the night, which was one of the best parts of the tour. Something that I definitely would have taken for granted, is being able to play first and enjoy the rest of the show without worrying about how well you play, playing better than the band before you. A lot of the same cities we went there, we also went on the Origami Button tour this summer. But Knuckle Puck played to some pretty intense shows. It was my first time playing in Canada. When we played in Toronto, and one of the bands that we were playing with, a band called Arm's Length, is also from Canada. And after we left Toronto and on our way back to Chicago, the COVID-19 pandemic spread to pretty much every band on the tour except for ours. And unfortunately for the Canadian band, because they had COVID, they weren't allowed to return to Canada until they were COVID free, because this was fresh out of the pandemic. So it was extra unfortunate for them. And there was a makeup show scheduled for our Chicago date that would have been about a month later, and then conveniently in the week prior to that show, our lead singer also got COVID, so then he wasn't able to play for that show, and we ultimately never got to fulfill that Chicago date. It was at a venue in Chicago called the Bottom Lounge. And there was a time at the first time I went to the Bottom Lounge, actually, was to see a band called Dance Gavin Dance. And a friend invited me along, and I made the terrible mistake of leaving to the venue and forgetting that I left something in the oven. And I ultimately remembered that there was something in my oven when I got to the venue. So I was in a position where I was calling all of my roommates, telling them about a possible emergency, and ultimately had to call the landlord of the dorms I was living in, and he came into our dorm and turned off the oven and all that. And I really didn't get in any trouble. It was a very dumb mistake, but it all worked out in the end, except for the the fish fillets that were in the oven, of course, which burned to a crisp. Yeah, I used to go to shows very regularly when I first moved to Chicago. It was an experience that I didn't have constant access to growing up in Montana. Montana was very uneventful. There wasn't that many people, so bands didn't ever really tour there. But in Chicago, I could see something basically every weekend. And that's what I did for the majority of the first year I lived in Chicago. There was a show that I played when I was in college. It was a solo acoustic thing. And backstage, right before I went on, the guy performing prior to me had a ukulele, and his ukulele case was on the side of the stage, and I stepped off, or the side of the stage in the backstage, and I hopped off the stage and didn't see the case there and stepped on it wrong and twisted my ankle right before I went on. And there was a good thing that there was a seat on stage to sit on, because that would have been a much more painful show to endure if that hadn't happened. I think I played okay for someone with a twisted ankle, though. I think that's the only injury that I've ever had at a show. There was one time on the Knuckle Puck tour. We were playing 2 days in Indianapolis at the same venue, and there was a kind of a manager, like a road manager for Arm's Length, and he offered me a hit of his joint before I went on stage. And I don't typically smoke before I perform, but I thought I'd be okay that night. And of course, that one hit was more than enough to make my playing look much worse. And it was conveniently the day of the tour where the CEO of Snow's record label had also showed up to the show. So it made it extra worse. I don't think it was so noticeable that anyone would have cared, but it was by far the worst I had played that whole tour. Yeah, I think a life on the road is something I could definitely do, as long as I have some way to pay for a home to come home to in Chicago. I feel like performing is, if I could make a decent living doing it, it would be worth not having any other domestic job in Chicago, because that's kind of a deal breaker. I'm pretty fortunate to be in a position where I can kind of come and go, but I don't know how much longer I can do it, because the rent in Chicago is constantly going up. I used to go to a lot of festivals in Chicago too, particularly Riot Fest and North Coast Fest. every once in a while, there's someone in particular who's worth seeing, or I can acquire a free ticket somehow. But ultimately, I feel like the lineup for music festivals is often getting worse, at least for the ones in Chicago usually are, becoming far more commercialized. A lot of one-hit wonders, a lot of pop artists. Not that they're bad, not that they aren't talented, but it's not the stuff I'm usually looking for. There's a record label based out of Los Angeles called 100% Electronica, and they focus primarily on vapor adjacent artists and a lot of electronic music. And they hosted the third annual Vaporwave Music Festival in Brooklyn called Electronicon. And I attended Electronicon 3 this summer with my friend Alex, and we drove all the way to Brooklyn in my Prius, and that was by far the best music festival I'd ever been to in terms of lineup, in terms of people that I knew, artists that I was a fan of, and the general atmosphere. The biggest issue about that festival, by far, however, was the lack of food trucks that they had there. Because they're no Lollapalooza, but they definitely attract several thousands of people, and they only had 2 food trucks. They had basically a vegan and a non-vegan option, which left many people waiting in just huge lines for over an hour for something to eat, and they don't really have any variety. But other than that, yeah, the festival was great. The crowd was great. The sound was good. The record label 100% Electronica came to me through interest in the artist George Clanton. And I came to know him primarily through the Big Stream, which is a live stream podcast that they do, where they talk about the label and music and things in pop culture a little bit. And around that time, the music of George Clanton was really speaking to me, as if this idea of vaporwave could actually work with vocals, which wasn't very common. And he made it work, but he also just legitimized vaporwave in a lot of ways that kept its credibility. Looks like the rain is dying out a little. So I think that's probably a good time to end this video. So I hope you enjoyed listening to a lot of highs and lows in my life here, while I sit next to the window and sip tea and smoke and enjoy the rain, enjoy the sounds of the still night. I will see you next time.